Oh, boy.
Woo! Hi.
Wow. Burying the lead. No, wait. That's the opposite of burying the lead.
I've never heard that phrase. I don't know what you're talking about, but
burying the lead means like you're doing an interview, and when you get to the end of it, you like reveal the most important point, but you only have like a few seconds left to talk about it. And so you buried the lead. You get it?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but that's the opposite of what we did. Because what I was going to say is that I am joined by the Golden Stallion here is joined by the lovely and hyper-intelligent.
Joined at the hip.
Kind of. Well, not at the hip. Dr. Stephanie Murphy.
Hello.
There was an eye roll there. Anyway, as you can tell by the superior audio quality, we're actually in the studio for this little jaunt.
Yeah.
And we're doing, this is part of the 5-part series based upon the review, that's reviewing the 5-part miniseries known as Fencer of Minerva, which is a somewhat popular hentai anime, out of Japan. Certainly one of the first ones to ever make its way into the United States in any popular fashion, thanks to the DVD revolution and the inexpensiveness of producing DVDs, and so it really, and allowing for the different languages and stuff, you could really make it all at the same time, as to where before you'd have to, like, I remember when La Blue Girl, which is another popular hentai, that was originally just put onto, on VHS. Like, I don't think every episode was on VHS, but some of it was on VHS. And like, you'd have to either sell the dubbed version, or you'd have to sell the version where, people are speaking Japanese, but then there's subtitles. You'd have to sell the subtitle version separately. But with DVD, you were able to really like make one copy, and people could just choose which version they wanted. Did they want the subtitles? They just click on the menus and away you go. It's hard to imagine just how much DVDs change things. People don't think about that enough.
I haven't spent any time thinking about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, more so than CDs, DVDs really like altered a lot of the concepts of entertainment. I don't think CDs, technically it's a leap, but like in a lot of ways, audio cassettes were still better. They were tougher, they had a lot going for them, but there's the sound quality of CDs, blah, blah, blah. I know. But with DVDs, you really had a paradigm shift in how you could, how media could be handled. It was really something. So anyway, Fencer Minerva. Now there's two, I'll say this again. There were 2 parts of this that we've already released.
Yes. Only for Sovereign Tech Patreon subscribers.
Exactly. And all you have to do is when you go to patreon.com/sovereigntech, of course, if you're hearing this, you probably know what to do. But if you want to find those other parts, if you don't have your custom RSS feed and you can't find the episodes with the big title that says hentai, in all caps.
No, does it really?
Yeah, it does.
Oh my God, that's funny.
You can go to the posts on patreon.com/sovereigntech, and you can choose, you can filter what posts show up, and you can just click on hentai, and then all these shows will show up. So we still have 2 more parts after this, but let's get into the 3rd part here, Stephanie. We just got done watching The Emergence, which is the 3rd episode of, again, Fencer of Minerva. Now, this episode is in the last recording that you and I did, reviewing episode 2. Mm-hmm. You said, where is this story going to go? Like, it was kind of over.
Yeah, it almost seemed like it was like a happily ever after at the end of
the free market reigned. And,
the free market, and they rode off into the sunset, Joe and Diana together forever.
Right, yeah. So what happens with this one?
She voluntarily sold herself into slavery, and, everything. There's a free market, and
Walter
the
Block would be
taxes
proud.
Are lowered. Walter Block would be very proud,
Yeah, absolutely. He would look at Fencer Minerva and say, you see, you defended the undefendable. Good job.
Walter Block said he likes my writing. He sent me an email once and said that, yeah.
That is
He encouraged me to continue.
I cannot imagine him complimenting a woman. I think that's phenomenal.
I think it was pretty much just because at that time I was pretty well in alignment with his views anyway. So I don't know if he would still send me the same compliment now. It might be more like a screed of like, you're a dirty feminist or something.
Yeah, maybe he'd send it with like, the transparent sheets for an overhead slide.
Right, showing why women in general are stupider than men.
Maybe he'd use that since we've had PowerPoint.
He might be like, hey baby, you're here on the bell curve.
Yeah. Anyway, Walter Block. So yeah, so right. It ended off. The episode 2 ended off. Everything was happy-go-lucky. The area they were living in went free.
It made you think there was no more, but there's more.
But there's more, right? And so this episode 3 opens up, and again, folks, I spoiled the shit out of these. You go watch them first, and then you can
like a spoiled slave girl. I'm just spoiling all the episodes.
Joe said that to Diana in this.
He did. Yeah.
But in this episode, it starts off where Sho and Diana are in just some town, and it is literally a nameless town. They never name it.
But it's within the kingdom of Doria, right?
Well, I don't know if it's within the kingdom of Doria. It could be well outside.
Okay.
I mean, we're not really clear on that. But anyway, they're in a tavern, and just kind of enjoying themselves, eating whatever. It seems like they're trying to find some kind of work because Diana talks about getting a job.
Right, because they don't have, they're at some kind of restaurant and they can only afford, everyone else is eating and drinking, and they can only afford, a little crummy piece of bread. And they're like, we've had a lot of trouble finding, where Diana's like, I've had a lot of trouble finding jobs lately. And Show's I know, we need to find you some work or something.
Oh, no, I think it was Sho. It's not described in this episode what exactly the work is that they're going for. But anyway, so you have that, and what happens is this group of elitists walk into the tavern and start to cause a bit of trouble. In fact, it very quickly turns into, much like what we described in the last episode of this series, it turns into kind of a rape scene to where these, rich elitists start
they're just
groping
walking in
these
and
women.
groping the waitresses.
Yeah, taking their shirts off and just,
fondling their tits and
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Diana wants to stand up and put a stop to it quickly. But she forgets that she's a slave and she can't exactly do that.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
It's just when you put it that way, it's that is what
right.
What goes on, yeah.
So, and then another female character comes in who you don't really get a good look at. She's very much covered, almost looks like the Sheik from Legend of Zelda. And she comes in and she's apparently in charge of all this and calls all the shots. But it creates kind of a stir. Sho gets involved, and then this young woman who is, like I said, very dressed up, or very covered, her uncle kind of shows up and starts saying, this is outrageous that you're doing this. You can't be doing this here. You can't be causing all this trouble in town. How dare you, blah, 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 which, he's kind of right. That she's just taking advantage of these people. It's really crazy.
Yeah. Acting like she owns the place.
Right. And so this uncle kind of, it appears he befriends Sho. And of course that means Diana has to follow as Sho's slave.
And he's looking at Diana very lecherously.
Well, that's what you find out. So they end up staying at the uncle's palace.
And the uncle is caretaking, what's her name?
Patris. Mistress Patris.
Yes. He's her caretaker.
Right.
Because she's an orphan.
Wealthy.
Yeah. And her parents were very wealthy, and she ended up as an orphan, and he kind of assumed guardianship, I guess.
Right. So they're at this palace, and Diana ends up serving Mistress Patris and all this, and she wants to kind of make a mockery of Diana, and apparently she's very turned on by Sho as well.
She's kind of jealous of Diana because she likes Diana's I'll tell the girl stuff here. She's jealous of Diana because Diana has bigger tits than her, and she's obviously more experienced, and she has Sho, and Patris likes Sho as well, but she also likes Diana. So she wants to and she's a bratty girl who's kind of used to getting her way and everything and being in charge of stuff. So she wants Diana to be her slave. And then so she pretty quickly she tries to, at the tavern, they try to buy them, right?
Oh, yeah. She does try to buy from Sho.
And Sho says, I won't sell Diana no matter what. But then the uncle offers, well, why don't you come stay at our palace or whatever and work? And both of them would work or something like that.
Sure.
So so Diana's working and being a servant for Patris. And Patris is come here, Diana, come into my chambers. And, and Diana's like, yes, mistress. And then Patras like takes off all her clothes and she's getting dressed or something. She takes off all her clothes and she's like, "What do you think of my body, Diana?"
Well, unfortunately, the voice acting is a little rough.
It could have been so much sexier.
Yeah.
If the voice acting were like just a little bit better, but I overlooked it. I got into it anyway.
Because Patras sounds like, what do you think of my body, Diana? Like,
Yeah,
that's
she
almost
does.
exactly how she sounds. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of it. And appears to be a very young woman.
Yeah.
Maybe dangerously young, if you want to go down that road.
No, she's just kind of like, I just saw her as like a teenager and she's kind of like skinny,
Yep, she's skinny, small breasts.
Not very experienced, yeah.
Yeah, she's a virgin. They let that cat out of the bag. But anyway, please continue. I was enjoying your regaling.
So she goes, "What do you think of my body, Diana?" And Diana's like, "Oh, it's very beautiful, Mrs. Patras." And Patras is like, "You're lying, Diana. My tits are too small. They're not big like yours. Did they get bigger from show touching you?" And she goes, "No,
it's amazing how well you remember this.
No, mistress. No, they didn't." And she goes, "Show me how he touches you while you're making love," or something like that. And Diana's like, "No." And then she gets sent back to Show, and she's telling Show about her day. And she's like, "Well, we had this really weird interaction, like where she was asking, she seems to be very curious about how we have sex." And Show is like, "Oh, you don't say." And then they start basically fucking. And
Show
in a very cute way. Like
Show and Diana.
Yeah, they're very sexy together. It's always cute.
Yeah, he's playing with her tits, and then he's
I love
rubbing
how
her.
they show the animation of that too, where they have like a nipple, like a hard nipple, and they have like two little fingers, like kind of pinching and rolling and tweaking the nipple. It's like, okay, that looks really realistic. I can imagine how that feels, and it feels good.
Hey, yeah, right on.
If done in the right way, of course.
Yes.
So you can't just like touch a nipple anyway and it feels good. Like that's stupid. But
yeah, and you don't want to do a cold start.
Yes,
So,
you got to do it the right way. But
That's
anyway,
right.
I can imagine like the times that, my nipples have been touched like that and it feels really good.
Yeah, so that kind of is the first, other than the groping that happens in the non-consensual groping that happens in the tavern, it's kind of the first sex scene, even though it's really, it's more of a fondling.
I think at one point, I think they get to like actually having sex. And
they get to the
like,
PIV?
Yeah, because I remember
even though sex is more than that.
He's like sitting on the bed and she's sitting on his lap, like facing away from him. And it looks like they're fucking.
Oh, and maybe that was.
And then she's making all these moans and stuff, and Patras comes to the outside of their door of their room and is listening to them have sex.
Yeah.
And then she goes, "Diana, I need you. Come to my chamber right now." And so then Diana is like, she's like, "Oh shit," and Show's like, "All right, go." And so, he's like left there with blue balls, and she's like, "Oh god damn it, I have to go serve my mistress," and it's part of being a slave, So she goes in to Patras' room, and Patras' boyfriend is there, who's like this dumb, inept, like doofus, Kyle, who lives in the castle, and I don't know what he does at the castle, but something for her uncle probably.
Yeah.
But he's like her boyfriend, and he's a total doof. And
he's been like following her around, not exactly a boyfriend, but yeah.
I guess you could say that. So he's in the room, and they get Diana in there, and immediately they tie her up to the bed, like spread eagle, like one, to a 4-post bed, and then they start like, touching her boobs and like turning her on, and like it's really interesting because in the anime, they show that women are turned on by like a close up of their nipples that are like, hard and like sticking out. And even when they're saying like, "Oh no, stop, I'm embarrassed," or something like that, which they often do, it's like you can see like there's at least some evidence that they're turned on. Now, I think that, it's really important to remember that this is fantasy, because that can set a dangerous precedent. Like, some women, depending on what temperature it is in the room, depending on how many kids they've had, depending on how their body just is naturally, their nipples get hard when they're not turned on.
Right.
And they don't get hard when they are turned on. So nipple erection is not like a penis erection, which I think it's tempting for guys to assume that, because it's like for them, it's very straightforward. If they're turned on, their dick gets hard. If they're not, it's not going to get hard. But nipple erection is not like that, but they use it in that way as like sort of a simple artistic device to show that she's turned on.
Right. I mean, certainly never watch these things for like sexual instruction. Right. But, it's a very important rule here, I think, that we can lay out, which is that nipple erection and honestly even penis erection is not an automatic yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the mouth and the body should both be saying yes. The mouth, everything should be in agreement. Like, I don't really like when it gets, like into one of those areas where it's not really clear.
Right.
But there is kind of a lot of that in the film. But I guess I sort of like, just noticed it and then said, okay, I'll just like watch the rest of it. But
yeah, I mean, there becomes, of course, neither you or I agree with slavery, but like, there becomes like this concept of where, any slave should just expect that.
Yeah, any slave is going to get had sex with, right? Like,
by whoever, whenever.
If you're a slave, you're a sex slave.
Right. And
then they have to be like trained and like punished, all these in finger quotes, right?
Yeah.
So it's very BDSM-y, it's just very, very kinky.
Very domination based.
Now, I will say this. In some of the previous episodes, there were some sex scenes that were too dark and too kinky for me that I really didn't like, or a little too rapey even, where it was clear that it was like, no, this person is really raping this other person. That's not cool. That doesn't turn me on at all. But in this one, there were still BDSM stuff, obviously, because we're talking about
elements.
Slaves and tying people up, and there was even like some rope bondage that was depicted in a few of the scenes toward the end,
right,
where they had this elaborate little dress that somebody made and hog tied this woman. It was Patras with rope. So it was still very BDSM, but it was like, I guess it was, the volume wasn't turned up to like so high like it was in the previous shows. And it didn't bother me as much. I could kind of get into it. And also, it's important to say all the caveats, but you can also look at it as fantasy, like it's fantasy. It's no people were harmed in the making of this movie, except maybe the voice actors have embarrassing material of bad voice acting out there. But no real people were actually harmed in the making of this picture. It's all animated. So, there's a little more forgiveness, I guess, for like dark subjects being portrayed.
Sure.
I could appreciate the fantasy aspect of it. It's just important to point out that if you're watching it, like, you should also keep that in mind, that it is fantasy.
It is just a fantasy. Yeah. Yeah. So the scene continues on where...
So they're in Patra's room. Kyle is, quote, torturing Diana. She's tied up, spread eagle to the bed, and she's like, oh no, please stop. And he's like tweaking her nipples and making her come, and she's saying that she doesn't like it, but she comes and she's excited and she's very turned on.
All the while Patras is watching and
she's
playing with
masturbating.
herself.
And she's making herself come. So everybody's having a great time. Then Sho is like wondering what's going on, so he comes outside the door and he's like, Diana, are you okay? What's going on?
Right.
And Diana doesn't want to be caught being touched by another dude. She doesn't want Sho to know that Kyle is touching her and that she likes it. So she tells Kyle to go hide outside, jump out the window, and she tells Patra to get on top of her and start kissing her. And so she does. She sticks her face right in between Diana's tits, and she's like, "Yes, like that, very good. That's it."
Because Sho busts into the room,
and
it just looks,
it just looks like they're having a little girl scene.
Which is great. But Diana says, it's like, oh yeah, I'm just teaching Patras, the ways of the Force, as it were. And, and obviously, Kyle's gone. Now, what's happening during this whole sequence, though, that you see a cut to like 2-3 times, is the uncle is watching the whole thing. Yeah,
through a crack in the wall.
Which
it's
is
really
creepy.
Fucking creepy, because that's his niece.
Play with herself, totally nude and whatever.
But he's really, I think the implication is that he's really watching because it's Diana.
Yeah.
Because he has a huge boner for Diana.
Right.
And he's going to make her his slave.
Yeah.
Even though he has lots of other slaves and blah, blah, blah. So, so Sho busts in. Nobody knows that the uncle's watching. Everybody's unaware of that. But Sho busts in and he thinks he's kind of like saving the day. And he's like, oh, I'll punish both of you or something. How does
well,
that?
he says he'll punish Diana.
Diana later.
Which he quote
right?
unquote does.
Yeah.
And it's quote unquote because obviously she really, whatever it was, she seemed to enjoy. But
Yeah.
but what happens here is there's a change in the character of Patris, who, instead of going from the conventional, and I use the word conventional, okay, spoiled brat.
Yes.
All right. And be very, I'm saying conventional. I'm not saying there are such things as spoiled brats.
Right.
Okay.
It's like a character
right.
type. Yeah. In the conventional mindset.
Yes, exactly. So, but now she turns into where, Diana just pretty much, saved my reputation, saved, my Kyle's, perhaps even his life and all this. And she's like, oh, I want to be, Diana's my friend. I worship this woman.
Yeah. So she goes from being kind of mean and cruel to Diana to really like looking up to her. And,
right.
And it sort of reverses. Like, even though Diana's supposed to be her slave, like Patris wants to be Diana's slave now.
Yeah. And then shows by default.
Yes.
Because she really likes show as well.
Yeah.
So now what happens next, I can breeze through quickly. But pretty much like you said, the uncle wants Diana. And so he creates this scheme to where he supposedly hires Kyle, or he has Patris. Says she has to go deliver.
He sends everyone away from the house except Diana.
Right.
He pretends to be sick, and he says he has an important business document he needs to deliver to somebody in a different city, and he sends Patris and Sho to deliver the scroll.
Exactly.
But he actually also secretly hires Kyle to ambush them on the way.
Right, and kill Sho.
So that Diana will go to the uncle, and then he says as a reward for doing this, he'll give Kyle Patris to be his do whatever he wants with her.
Right, but then also the uncle actually triple-crossed.
Yes.
And hired
He's a crafty motherfucker, that uncle. And he's creepy, and he watches through the blinds.
Right, while twirling his mustache.
Yes.
But he hires hitmen to kill Kyle.
Yes.
As well, and Patris.
Because then Patris's inheritance is going to go to him.
Right. And then, it all gets blamed on Sho, and, it's no one's the wiser to what actually happened.
Right.
That whole plan gets foiled. That's the gist of it.
Yeah, because Kyle has sort of a crisis of conscience, and they kind of like figure out that something weird is going on.
Right. Yeah. And so after all that happens, Kyle is ashamed and runs, and goes away. Patris wants to become Diana's slave, but also Sho's slave. Diana's most importantly, but Sho's by default. And since Sho's the man, the law is how it is. And so Sho says, okay, yeah, I'll make you my slave. But he's got to do his, what kind of chalks up to prima nocta. If you were to put it into like a real world law, that used to be a thing where.
Well, he has to train her as his slave. He has to take her virginity.
Has to break her in.
Yes.
And he does so. And in fact, it's
Diana says, go ahead, do it.
Yeah, even though she kind of cries. She's not
she's
totally
kind of jealous.
with it.
She's a little sad, she lets him do it because she's the slave and he's the master.
Right. Because she's never experienced this.
Something.
Exactly. Yeah. And throughout the episode, there's constant references to how does Sho know how to do all these sexual acts? And he's like, well, we were separated from each other for 12 years, back from when we were kids. It's been 12 years later. He says, I've had the time of my life, effectively. And, so you kind of get the hint that she doesn't like the fact that he has done a lot of other stuff with other women throughout the whole thing.
In fact, she even says to him in the beginning of the episode, before Patris changes and everything, she says to Sho while they're having sex, oh, master, I'm worried that you're going to just forget about me and make Patris your slave instead.
Right.
Don't ever do that to me. And he's like, oh, I never will. And
he
fucks her. Yeah.
Well, now we'll table that for future episodes.
Okay.
Because this might become a
foreshadowing.
Thing. Yeah, a little foreshadowing.
Shit.
Okay, of what's to come, or perhaps what's not to come. But anyway, so the sex scene between Patris and Sho is probably the most vigorous sex scene in the series so far. There's doggy style. There's holding her up in the air because she's a little woman, and Sho's kind of a larger guy,
and she has to get broken in as her new slave,
and she's saying all the things. Take me, oh, I love it. All that wild stuff. Moans
now Sho
galore.
gets all this pussy, but he doesn't have any money.
Well.
How does he not have any money? And how does Diana not have any money?
Well, he's a man that lives by his sword, you know?
Yeah,
and
I guess he's like sort of a nomad.
Yeah, there's kind of a thing to that, you know, there's sort of a medieval style to that to where maybe you don't need a lot of money when you live by your sword.
Yeah, that's true. He's a good swordsman.
Yeah, kind of like
one.
Lancelot in First Knight or something.
Right.
But anyway, so that happens, and then, you know, did you have any comments about the vigorous sex scene that you wanted to make?
No, I mean, I thought it was kind of cute. I guess I liked that a little bit.
Is it one of the better ones you've seen in the series so far? Is it your favorite?
I think some of my favorites have been the ones between Sho and Diana when it's just them, and it's kind of like boring vanilla, you know, like regular heterosexual sex.
Sure.
But I did actually kind of like that one. The one where Diana gets tied up to the bed and Kyle and Patras are kind of like playing with her.
Oh, yeah.
I did like that one.
All right. Yeah, there you go. So
I got into that one.
All right. Well, we'll give a final rating of the episode at the end. I think we've been doing that. I forget if we went with letters or what. But
yeah.
We'll give a final rating. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I agree that the tie-up scene, you know, I'm not into the whole bondage shit or anything like that. But like, you know, tying up somebody on the bed, a little lace or something like that, maybe even a blindfold if you wanted to, have a surprise or something. Like, I think that can be cute. That can be done in a very nice way, I think. But anyway,
it's also more trouble than it's worth sometimes.
Well, there you go. I mean, the juice better be worth the squeeze. Yeah. So anyway, the sex scenes overall in this one, I mean, yeah, not bad, you know?
Yeah, I thought they were good in this one.
Yeah. So, you know.
And there was more sex scenes, too, in this one than the previous two shows.
I don't know. There's a couple.
Well,
it
actually,
depends how you count them.
Number one was probably the most sex scenes,
Yes.
the most number of sex scenes.
Yeah.
Two, there were fewer sex scenes. And there was one that I really didn't like. But the third one, there were more of them, and none of them were like ones that I really didn't like.
Yeah. Yeah. So this sex scene happens, and it's the next morning, and come to find out that, Sho says, "Go find me Kyle," and Kyle comes back and he says, "Look, I can't handle two slaves." You know, it's kind of like the old biblical saying, a man can't serve two masters. But there's actually a funny joke behind that, which was somebody asked Benjamin Franklin, and this is kind of a mythical story of sorts. I don't know that it actually was said, but somebody asked Benjamin Franklin, "You show me where in the Bible says you can't have more than one wife." And Benjamin Franklin said, "Sure." And he made that quote out of the New Testament where it says a man can't serve two masters.
Oh, like the wife is really the master.
Yeah.
Oh.
Which, whatever. I mean, the Bible verse is referencing you cannot serve money and God.
Oh.
Or it says Mammon and God, and Mammon is like a god of avarice of sorts. Anyway, that's a whole other subject. So, I mean, there's an interesting thought to be had there, but it's a funny point. But anyway, so Sho says, I can't handle two slaves.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'll sell you one. And, long story short, Kyle goes with Patras. And, because he's been in love with her forever, and she never really returned it, but now she's more than happy to be his slave. And they do a funny legal trick to where she's only going to be his slave in secret. That way they can get married and she can keep her inheritance and everything.
Oh, it's like a little behind the closed doors BDSM relationship.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah. Kyle even says, he's like, in town, no one will know, but in the bedroom.
Oh my God. She's a lady in the streets and a freak in the sheets or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow. I think I missed that line.
Yeah, well.
That's funny.
Anyway, and that's pretty much how it ends, and Diana and Sho go off and, there's
and I think Diana's happy that Patras won't be competing for Sho's affection anymore.
Right.
She has her own master.
Right.
That's not Sho.
Yeah, and it ends off with them going off to some villa, and it's heavily implied that they're going to go fuck, which is, great. I think that's fantastic.
Maybe that'll be in the next one.
Right. So overall, I think there's a couple subjects you want to get into about this episode. But first, what do you rank this episode as?
I would say, I really liked this one. I would give it B plus A minus.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I really like this one.
I'd match that B plus, something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Okay. Fair. No, that's good. So, okay. So like one or two issues you had with it, I wanted to cover these. You brought them up while we were watching, and
it wasn't really an issue, but one thing I noticed immediately, and I've noticed it in other shows too, but I never brought it up when we did a podcast about it yet, is like, this is a Japanese animation. It's anime, and it's made in Japanese originally. Like that's the original language it was in. And it had to be dubbed into English. That's why the voice acting sounds weird sometimes. But
yeah,
like all the characters are white. Why are the characters white?
So here's the interesting thing is that, and this is actually becoming a huge deal in Hollywood right now, but they're not.
They're not.
They're not white. It's an animation style. It's called mukokuseki. And what that means is, in Japanese, that means without nationality.
Oh.
And so
they're supposed to be racially ambiguous?
Kind of. They borrow a lot of different styles. Like it's one of the reasons that you see the style mukokuseki. It's one of the reasons that you see like blue hair is very popular, or purple hair, or all these wild colors and everything, because they want to make it, in a society effectively. Like this is kind of the perception that anime animators have. In a society where everything kind of looks the same, they want to make sure it doesn't look the same. Like this, this is, anime is the color, mukokuseki is the color palette upon the world of gray. And that's sort of the concept that they have. So they're not white. Okay. But they are like, they look white, but what they are is they are Japanese no matter what. First and foremost, they are Japanese.
Okay, because, that's really interesting that my mind filled in the gap and said they're white, because it's like a medieval thing. So I'm thinking European, and then like Sho is blonde. Diana's got like brown kind of reddish hair. Like Petra's had red hair. Like that, when I see those hair colors, it nothing about it said Asian to me.
Right.
Except maybe the ninjas and samurais, but that wasn't particularly... The nomads, especially, they look very European. Okay,
but this is what they would say to you is that's a very Western perspective, and how dare you tell the Asians what they should look like? Like literally, that's what they'd say.
Okay. Like it's fair enough. That's fair. I'll take that criticism.
Yeah, like that's you projecting what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is.
Right. And that's what they would tell you. And that's. And I'm
sure there were castles in Japan and nomads and nomadic stuff. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They've experienced, I'll spend a minute on this. Okay. If you read the works that kind of describe a lot of what a lot of people get hot and bothered about when it comes to Western civilization today, like the works of Samuel P. Huntington, like he wrote The Clash of Civilizations. In that, he even talks about how Japan literally went through everything the Western world did. Totally on its own, independently, no Western influence required whatsoever, which is always the case and he's praising Western civilization, this guy. I would not do so. But I always bring up this example because when people say without Western civilization, you wouldn't have this. It's like, no, motherfucker.
No,
by your
Japan
own metrics,
is an example. Yeah,
that you would still have it.
Yep,
you'd have it very well. In fact, maybe even depending on how you're looking at
maybe
it, perhaps
even better or different. Yeah,
yeah. So that doesn't fly. But I think that's something that people miss, is that these are absolutely Japanese characters. They are being drawn Japanese. They act Japanese. Just they have outside looking in, it looks like a bunch of Westerners. Now, that's not to say that like Betty Boop and some other American characters did not have some kind of influence on this stuff. There's a lot of truth to that, because Betty Boop is such an international sex symbol. There's no way it didn't affect everything, even though in America, she's largely seen as just being kind of cute. In other parts of the world, oh, no, she's Marilyn Monroe, she's the real deal.
I always associated Betty Boop with Marilyn Monroe.
Right. Yeah. So like some people say that's where the big eyes come from and all this, but it's important when you realize it, when you kind of do that 2 steps back, you go, oh, there's a bunch of different features here. Right. It's not just white people. There's a lot of different things, kind of.
I'll have to look for that specifically next time, because the only things that said Japanese to me were the ninjas and the samurais.
Right.
And the rope bondage.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, a lot of that, sure, could have, some of those aspects of like the hentai particularly, could have come from an American audience, or from American influence of some kind. No question there. But like the anime style has been long held, and it's a very old word. Again, it's mukokuseki, and it's without nationality. So that the trick is to make it like to where, you can't pin it down to anything.
Okay.
Other than, everything about it is, again, is Japanese. And I mean, I could go on forever about that because, there's some degree of Japanese isolationism, cultural isolationism that occurs there. But that's a whole other subject. So does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm just thinking like I didn't see any black characters, but the thing about that is like you shouldn't see black or white or Asian characters.
Right.
You should just see characters. Right. And so,
well, I'll tell you, or go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So when Japanese artists do black characters,
yeah,
it's bad.
Oh, really? Really?
Like it's
like, what do they like? Well, they exaggerate like a caricature of.
They go with that's where they pretty much every black character they pretty much draw like Mr. T.
Oh, wow.
And they make him act like it too. Like it's kind of like a lot of people freak out. There's a game, Final Fantasy VII. It's by many considered the greatest game of all time.
Yeah.
But there's a character in that, I think his name's Barrett, who is a black guy. And like, it was kind of a scandal because of like, he was black. Like, all these tropes that you think of in cinema and all that.
Yeah.
He lived up to every single one of them. And for a lot of black people that they don't see that as a positive.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's, for lack of a better phrase, it's a blessing. Perhaps that they don't, because when they do bring that on, well, there you go. Again, I mean, kind of picture like the concept behind mukokuseki is almost like the ultimate mixed race.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
It's not excluding anybody necessarily,
right?
But it's also not really highlighting anyone either.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it makes me think of sometimes I get voiced over casting calls or auditions where they say they want somebody who sounds like hard to pin down, like racially ambiguous, basically, or ethnically ambiguous.
Sure, right.
They want someone with like a difficult to place accent.
Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think the real life example would be like Jessica Alba.
Jessica Alba. I'm trying to think what her voice sounds like.
Well, not her voice, but her look.
Oh, her look. Oh, okay.
Like she is the real world example of mukokuseki. I mean, she in fact, she's been hired for jobs because of that, because you can't pin down where she comes from. She has so many different features. So anyway, so that's the answer to that. I mean, if people disagree with it or don't like it, I mean, that's up to you. But that's what, animators have in mind in Japan.
Got it.
So,
cool.
Were there any other issues that came up in the episode?
Trying to think of some.
Sure. I mean, I'm enjoying doing this. I think, in fact, I've already gotten one comment from a person on Patreon saying that, like, they didn't know a lot of the stuff that we've covered about the stylizings in anime. And so this has actually been really great to cover because it explains a lot of the culture, a lot of the ideas behind it's like, why does anime just have that anime look? Because it is super unique. And these are the, we talked about why do they pixelate genitals? Why do they do all this? And so I'm really glad to be able to cover this, because a lot of people just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I wonder, like, why it seems like all the sex in there, like everything is BDSM. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's never any sex that really portrays like equality. There's always like power dynamics in there. And it's pretty much never like femdom either. Like the female is never dominant really, except I guess you could say when it's two women where it's like Patris and Diana, where Patris is kind of bossing her around a little bit. But even then it's like, I don't know, she wasn't really that dominant. And then there was also a guy in the room, like kind of doing the dirty work for her, being the one that. So, I guess like, I guess I want, like, is all anime like that? I haven't watched much anime. Is all hentai like that?
No.
Okay.
So, and a lot of it is the opposite. And you're going to end up with a lot of gender bending. that is incredibly common in hentai.
Okay.
This is a case, what you're describing is a case of really what I think is the Fencer of Minerva's source material, which we talked about in episode 1 of this series, which is John Norman's gore novels.
Yeah.
Which, understand, there's an audience for that, because John Norman, I don't know how, he's got to be like 70 or something. He just, 2 weeks, end of August, he just released book 34.
Oh my God.
Of the gore novels. He's been writing them since like the 60s.
Oh, you've been reading them for like 20
have.
years. Yeah.
And believe me, I got my copy of book 34. Just because anyway, well, that's another story. But
he's a kinky motherfucker,
he is
isn't he?
something else. Well, he wrote a great book called Imaginative Sex.
Oh.
This is a great read. If you actually do, like I said, don't use this hentai shit as a manual for sex.
Yeah.
But Imaginative Sex, I think there's a lot to glean from that. I think there's a lot of really great shit.
Oh, I'd like to read that.
Yeah, it's one of the better books ever done by a man about sex, because a lot of, unless it's like Paul, Dr. Paul Joanides.
He's awesome.
It can get touch and go,
Yeah.
as far, no pun intended, as far as sex books getting written by men. But I like John Norman's work in Imaginative Sex anyway. I thought that was fantastic. So this is a case why all of this keeps coming up like that is because really I think the source material is the gore novels, and that is how they run.
Right.
And John Norman, admittedly, he's a pretty libertarian guy, which would explain also why there's so much free market and get rid of taxes and all this. In the series.
Yeah.
Even though he wasn't directly
sound
involved.
money, it's all sound money.
Right.
They're buying the slaves with gold coins and copper coins and
Exactly.
shit like that.
Yeah, exactly. Even all that, he's kind of, he's not a warmonger, but like, I don't know.
There's definitely a lot of coups and wars in the Fencer of Minerva.
Yeah, he's not conservative. He just has a ton of very traditional ideas.
Yep.
And that's the best way I can describe it. It's just he holds on to a lot of traditional
a lot of
concepts.
BDSM people are like that. They're like older, they're Republicans,
Cops.
they're like cops, status. Yeah.
So anyway, so when we get into other hentai, and we are going to be covering other shows in this series, in the hentai series overall. And in fact, the next one we're going to get into is going to get into the very strange.
Shit.
We're going to be watching Bible Black. So if you want to go download your copies or, buy your copies of that, do so now, because there's a lot to
Brian
Bible
commands you. He's your master. Yeah. You must obey.
Which, by the way, I suppose I should say this at the beginning of each of these episodes. If you want to watch Fencer Minerva, yes, it's available on torrent sites, but the Amazon link is in the show notes for each one of these episodes. And that'll be true for whatever series we're talking about. And of course, if you use the Amazon link in the show notes, we'll get a cut.
Yay!
So thank you for that. But anyway, I agree with you. B plus episode, maybe A minus in your ballpark.
Yeah.
I think, how long are we going here? What are we at?
43 minutes.
43. That's perfect. Each one has been about 40 minutes.
Cool.
So do you have anything else you wanted to say on the episode?
No. Was there something else? It sounded like you were trying to fish for me to bring something up. Maybe I forgot it. No.
No, the main one I thought was bringing up, Muko Kusake. I think that's a huge concept to get into.
Yeah, cool.
And remember, that means literally without nationality. So it's not about being white. It's about being everything. In a very real sense.
Everybody likes kink and BDSM. Right? As long as you're a submissive woman.
Yeah, right. As long as you're the guy with the whip. No,
yes,
right?
That's right. Doesn't matter where you're from.
Anyway, so we'll be back with episodes 4 and 5 in the very near future here. And
that's right.
Yeah, we'll cover those and we'll get them released. And I'm glad people have been enjoying this series. So everybody, Carpe Lucem, Stephanie, of course, always wonderful to have you on the show.
Yes, master.
Oh, there it is. You bring everything to life, I must say.
Oh, master, I'll do anything you say.
All right.
Oh, master, I am your devoted slave. That's what her voice sounds like.
Sovereign Tech listeners, I must rise to this occasion. If you'll excuse me, I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech,
Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.